Hello and welcome back to What I Wish I'd Known When I First Started Self-Publishing. I am Carly with Dragon Key Press, and today we're going to go into the editing part of the publishing cycle. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on various whatnots and who's its, but I figured you probably should know about the different types of editing. The main ones being structural, developmental, content, copy, proofreading, and fact-checking. So we're going to go ahead and kind of take a look at these different types. First up is developmental editing, which technically is first on the list, even though I didn't mention it first. This type of editing involves, as you can probably guess, help in the developmental part of your writing, and will probably be employed earlier in the writing, definitely not when you have a finished draft. It's easier to not be the one providing this service for yourself, as we tend to get quite attached to our darlings, and have a hard time seeing them as a reader might. The developmental editor's job is to see, as the reader might see, point out what works and what doesn't work, and give the author a better idea of how their work will be received. You can also get a lot of feedback from beta readers, friends and family, or even a college or high school professor on this point. This type of editing relies heavily on giving you feedback and less on correcting grammar and punctuation. A developmental editor will likely focus on general feedback, content feedback, structural feedback, and probably some kind of book outline, just to try and help you figure out the best way to make your story come across. As the term suggests, general feedback focuses on general things, recurring themes, glaringly obvious things that might need your attention. Just remember, any type of editing is meant to help you, not to bring you and your story down, unless you've got a really bad editor, in which case fire them on the spot. Structural editing is also called manuscript critique or evaluation editing. In this type of editing, a professional editor will look at the overall structure of your manuscript, check the flow, check to make sure it's complete and not missing anything pertinent, and look over the overall quality. You'll usually get a page separate from the manuscript in question, with key points and observances as a sort of heads up to what you'll find inside. Any editor worth their salt will probably mark up your manuscript with scribbled questions, thoughts, concerns, potential grammar issues, etc., but they typically look at the big issues, not so much the smaller stuff, such as grammar, unless it's glaringly obvious, which sometimes it is. If you get a good edit, though, minimal comments, etc., you're probably ready to move on. But if you get a lot of markups, you'll want to give it another go-through to make sure everything is sound, that it flows well, that it doesn't exclude things that it needs, or include unnecessary things, and so forth. This stage can be critical in helping you avoid potentially costly, both monetarily and time-wise, edits down the road. Better to know sooner than later, especially if you're under any kind of deadline set by yourself or others, than to figure it out last second and have a mad scramble and then put out something that is less than stellar. For this type of editing, your manuscript should be finished. This is not developmental kiddie pool anymore. You need that finished manuscript, which is something they definitely look for when you have an editor looking at the structure. They want that finished manuscript. If it feels incomplete, they will not recommend moving on. They might recommend a developmental editor to help you work everything out, though. Not always necessary, but it happens. Notice how each one gradually hones in, like a microscope, slowly focusing in on the smaller details. Like the manuscript is your blueprints, and developmental is the structure, and then you've got the actual structural editing is more like the electrical and the plumbing, those kinds of things. There's a reason for that. Best to make sure the big picture is good before focusing on details that you might have to change or cut later. Which brings us to content editing. This is also called substantive or full editing. It's at this point that the editor starts really digging into the words on the page. Think of it like buying a puzzle. The first few editing types are focused more on making sure you have all pieces, that they all belong to the same puzzle, etc. Now we're worried about how they start to go together. According to scribemedia.com, in addition to evaluating the structure of your book, a content editor reads and carefully edits the manuscript with an eye on the completeness, flow, and construction of ideas and stories, working paragraph by paragraph and chapter by chapter. These editors are going to focus more on overall tone and voice, Like it said, going paragraph by paragraph to make sure the flow is good, especially during transitions to different scenes and chapters. They'll also look at incomplete segments and give you overall ideas on how to smooth it all out and so forth. As for the voice, they'll keep in mind your target audience and try to help you make sure your word choice fits in with that audience. You're not going to use insanely huge words, for example, if writing for an elementary school audience, unless you're a science book. But even then, you try to keep it age appropriate. The same goes for any target audience. There are some terms, words, etc. that you only use for certain genres, and your content editor will help keep things consistent with that so there isn't something blaringly out of place. Just as a heads up, content editing, though more fine-tuned than structural, developmental, and the like, is not the same as line editing, which focuses more on individual lines instead of paragraphs. A content editor might suggest, or even go ahead and do it on their own, the moving of paragraphs and larger chunks of text to various areas to make things make more sense. They won't change chapters on you, but they will try to make everything flow better on a paragraph-by-paragraph basis. Think of them as interior designers helping you figure out where each piece of furniture in each room should go. Only these designers aren't worried about the little touches, the decorations, and the like, just the furniture placement. Line editing, on the other hand, will start to focus more on those little details, sometimes called stylistic editors or structural editors. These professionals will get down to the nitty-gritty. You thought you had a lot of feedback on the previous edits? Be prepared to get even more. Line editors will go line by line to make sure everything works on a more microscopic level. They're not quite to that final copy level, but they get close. These people aren't looking at the big picture. They're down on the ground level with their magnifying glasses like some gumshoe detective looking for those things that stand out. I guess the best comparison is to say these guys are the boots on the ground force. They may miss stuff on grammar and similar, but they're going to make sure your book is polished line by line. They'll help you tighten things up or loosen them as necessary, like giving your car a good tune-up, and they'll also help you make your words sing. They're not focused as much on spelling and punctuation, but some of them will point it out. Spelling and punctuation is more the focus of copy editing, which is the almost and sometimes last line of editing. This is the seasoned detective making sure you've got the right spelling, the correct grammar, and all the super tiny details that could make or break your book. Note, there will always be something to be found. Too many spaces, the wrong spelling, the occasional missing word, or just the wrong punctuation. Copy editors will find them, hopefully most if not all of them, and help you fix them. But something always does kind of fall through the cracks, even in traditional publishing. So if you find a grammar mistake or a spelling error down the road after you've published, don't freak out. You can always go back and fix it later. And just know, even the big-time traditional publishers have this issue. It's best to make sure whoever is copy editing your manuscript, however, is familiar with the typical rules of grammar for whatever culture you're writing in. Like I said, this type of editing is fine-tuning that microscope to see almost every single little detail way past just tiny bits of dirt. Let's move on to the final, though sometimes interchangeably used with copy editing, process of proofreading. At this stage of the game, your manuscript should be formatted for print, and is all but ready to go. Your proofreader will make sure everything looks great. Make sure it gets that final coat of luster dust before it gets sent on to the printer. As the name says, they're looking at the proof. They will look at any formatting issues, wrong page numbering, paragraphs looking odd on the pages, inconsistent formatting, and things like that. They're your last defense before you hit that publish button, and it's their job to make sure everything looks great. They're worried more about the cosmetic and less the content. A lot of companies will fold proofreading and copy editing together, which is why there's the occasional confusion about the two types. Just remember, copy editing deals with finding all those little grammar, spelling, and related errors. Proofreading is making sure the visual product is ready for a paying audience. Kind of like a dress rehearsal before the actual first show of the play. It's that pre-show to make sure any last kinks are worked out and won't cause issues in the printing process. Now, if you're dealing with anything that isn't fiction, you need to make sure you or someone who knows the subject in question fact-checks your content. This should happen in the more structural developmental parts of editing, but it is incredibly important. No one wants to read a book about dinosaurs where the types are mislabeled or the author gives the incorrect period for whichever dinosaur. Just like any good reporter, you gotta make sure your facts check out and are accurate, or as accurate as you can make them. You might need a bit of this in fictional writing as well, but it's not as big a deal, since those are created worlds, even if based in reality. All the same, fact-checking is important and shouldn't be overlooked. I hope that gives you at least a rudimentary understanding of the different editing stages or types. As always, feel free to leave comments or ask questions in the comments sections, and I'll try to answer them in the future video. I'm Carly with Dragon Key Press, and I'll see you next time.